Hello everyone, it's Martin aka Anders, and today I'm going to bring you your one-stop metagame primer for the VALORANT Ignition series. For those of you that don't know, Riot just announced the Ignition series. It's going to be a collection of events where they partnered with major community entities like G2 Esports to sort of formalize their initial push into esports for VALORANT. With that all said, we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to hit the normal topics that I do with where my data set is at, agent play rates and win rates. Then I'm going to dive into compositions, and then I'm going to take a little bit of a different look than what we're used to, where I'm going to look at compositions on a team-by-team basis so that we can look at these events coming up, look at the lineups, who are participating, and have an idea of what we can expect. So let's dive right in. Kicking us off with the state of the data, I've limited this to only be data from patch 1.0 onwards, so only stuff we've seen since full release. That includes 32 unique tournaments and just over 6,500 rounds of gameplay. As an additional tidbit that I thought you guys might find interesting, I've also broken down what it looked like regionally. Generally speaking, I've had mostly North American data in this set, but because of the way that tournaments have panned out since full release, EU is actually the largest contributor to the data set right now, and you'll see that evidence itself once we get to compositions a bit later. Without wasting any more time, we'll jump right into agent play rates. For these play rates, I've included the play rates as of right now versus those that we saw at the end of Twitch Rivals. Starting from the top, you have the first three usual culprits in Sage, Brimstone, and Cypher. The only thing of note here is that Cypher saw a major increase in play since Twitch Rivals, over 5%, and that allowed him to skip over Brimstone into the second slot. Next up, we have Raze coming in at 4th. Her being in 4th at this point is less about her seeing massive increases in play and more other agents seeing massive decreases in play, and we'll get to that in just a moment. In the 5th slot, we saw the second largest increase in play across all of the agents, and that was Sova going up from 44 all the way to 50. He comes in where we would have seen him much more typically prior to full release. Coming in at 6th, we have Reyna, who saw an absolute nosedive in her play rate. This shouldn't really come as a surprise to anyone who's been listening to my content, or frankly, any major VALORANT content creators' content. None of us really have strong opinions that Reyna was going to make a major push into the metagame, and this shows that Twitch Rivals was sort of an outlier where people were just interested in playing the new agent. I suspect we'll see it drop even further from here, and this is what I was getting at when I was talking about Raze climbing the ladder, not so much by virtue of her increasing in play rate, but more so the fact that Reyna was 4th prior to this and just completely fell off the map. Sneaking right up behind Reyna with increasing speed is the agent I expect to surpass her almost immediately as soon as we get more tournaments, and that's Breach, who saw a 9% increase in play, the largest of any agent in the pool, going from his confusingly low 31% during Twitch Rivals to north of 39% now, and that will almost assuredly increase further from here. Next up, we have the only agent who didn't see a significant change between Twitch Rivals and now, and that's Jet, who saw a single percentage increase going from her 19.5 during Twitch Rivals to 20.5 now. After her, we have Omen, who's seeing a slight increase in play. This is the one that I think is the most interesting out of this list. I was expecting Omen on launch to see substantially more play than he's getting right now, and I think it's still going to be coming. I'm hoping that these sort of higher profile events that we're seeing with the Ignition series drive this play rate quite a bit higher than it is. Coming in second to last, we have Phoenix, who saw a crazy drop in play rate. A full 11% down from where he was at during Twitch Rivals. The only reason his play rate is even at where it is right now is because a certain team, who we'll talk about later, has suddenly started playing him constantly. Last, it's who we all expect with Viper. We know that she has buffs incoming, and clearly pros' perception of her says that those buffs are desperately needed. She can't even hold on to the 5% she had in Twitch Rivals and drops to 4.1. Flipping over to agent win rates, things are actually kind of interesting. Up at the top, we have Jet, who is still managing to hold on pretty well to the massive win rate she had during Twitch Rivals, dropping a little bit, which is completely reasonable given the increase in sample size, but she's still holding strong north of 53%, which is crazy. Right below Jet, we have Viper in complete heartbreak. I still don't understand how this agent consistently holds a top 3 win rate slot and is also consistently the least played agent in the game. The perceptual mismatch there will always confound me. TLDR, play more Viper. Moving below Jet and Viper though, things get really muddled really fast. This is the first time where we've done a win rate tier list where you have a very clear top of the pack, a very clear bottom of the pack, and then a big cluster in the center that has very minimal degree of variance. And it's pretty obvious why this is happening when you look at the agents included. We have Sage, Cypher, Brimstone, Sova, who due to their high play rates are naturally going to gravitate towards this central tendency. Breach being here is a little bit less an indicator of his play rate and more an indicator that he might actually be belonging to this sort of central 50-50 win rate. Omen is the real outlier though, because his win rate is low enough that him being this high is in no way a result of his play rate and is actually just a reflection of the fact that he's outperforming alternatives. Rounding out that middle pack, you have Raze chasing just barely behind. She's literally only 0.1% off of Brimstone's win rate, so you could probably include her in that mix as well. I wanted to mention her separately though, because I had commented in my last video about her 48% win rate being really painful to acknowledge, and her coming up closer to 50% here was something I wanted to point out. It's a little bit more reflective of what I expect from her. Then rounding out the pack, we have 2 agents who are significantly below the rest, and they are Reyna and Phoenix. This is absolutely where I expect these agents to be, so it doesn't come as a surprise to me personally, but an interesting tidbit that I'll add on is since me pulling these statistics, I've recorded a couple other major events, and Reyna has since dropped below even Phoenix and is now the worst agent in the game in terms of win rate. I hate to be that guy who says I told you so, but to people who thought that Reyna was going to have a home in the competitive ecosystem, the proof is in the pudding, and she's actually just awful. And you can dismiss it a little bit by saying she's still a super new agent and people don't know how to use her completely properly, so there's a little bit of ineffectivity there and it will go up over time, and that's a completely legitimate counter argument. But I'll go on the record saying that even as we add the 12th agent, I will be shocked if Reyna ever breaks bottom 4 in terms of win rate. She is just in every way, shape, and form not designed for coordinated competitive play. Now that I've given Reyna her fair share, we gotta touch on Phoenix briefly. He saw an actually pretty substantial increase in win rate here, but that's because of the team that's playing him. A lot of you might know who it is already, but we'll get there when we get there. Jumping right across to team comps, we're gonna tackle the top 5 since release. In the first 2 slots, we see classic tried and true Common Core comps coming back in. We have Common Core plus Sova and Common Core plus Raze. Coming in the 3rd slot, we actually have Shock and Awe plus Cypher. Then in 4th, we have a composition that has shown up a fair amount and makes quite a bit of sense. It's Shock and Awe, but you are replacing Raze with Reyna. Coming in at 5th, we have a comp that I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely hate and cringe every single time I see it locked in. This composition is the sort of 3-piece core that we see across the board almost all the time with Brimstone, Cypher, and Sage, and then they bring in their second 2 elements as both Raze and Reyna. I'll talk on why I hate this so much in just a minute. Kicking us off with that Common Core plus Sova comp, it made up almost 11% of the overall metagame with a win rate of 52.1%. This is what we expect from this composition. It is so tried and true at this point that if someone was to ask me what the #1 comp has been in Valorant since even beta, this would be my go-to. Coming in 2nd, we have EU's favorite Common Core variant with Raze. It made up 9.3% of the overall meta, but had a disappointing 49.2% win rate. Next up, we have Shock and Awe, which is increasingly becoming my favorite archetype in the game. It came in at just under 8% of the overall meta with an almost 55% win rate. Given how frequently it showed up, for it to be able to maintain that win rate is actually just disgusting. Next up, we have that Shock and Awe variant where you clip out the Raze and drop in the Reyna. It represented just under 6% of the overall meta and had a win rate that, while great, was still quite a bit south of the standard Shock and Awe. And that brings us to the comp that I said I hated. Before I get into the numbers of it, I want to go on a quick little rant. Bear with me. Right now, if you are making compositions, one of the things that you have to take into consideration is that you have to be running a 3-piece core. It is as close to mandatory as it could possibly be. You have to be running Sage, Cypher, and either Brimstone or Omen. It has been shown time and time again, patch after patch, that you have to have that as a basis for your compositions. Given that as an underlying premise, if you're gonna fill your last 2 slots with Raze and Reyna, 2 of the most selfish agents in the game that have very little team utility in terms of entry or information gathering, why would you ever expect to be able to do well? You're basically saying that we have to get entries off of Reyna Leers or we're just dead in the water. You're trying to execute off of Brimstone smokes and maybe forcing mispositioning off of paint shells. It just doesn't make sense. There has to be more meat on the bone. You need to have something like a Sova Arrow for recon, or you have to have deep entry utility on someone like Breach, or hell, even Phoenix has better entry utility than Reyna. I just hate whenever I see Reyna Raze. I genuinely think it is awful, and I think that there is very little argument that could be made where that is a rational compositional choice. I developed that opinion of this composition during the tournaments while I was watching it, before I saw any of these numbers. You can choose to believe me on that or not, it doesn't matter. But after seeing these numbers finally, everything that I thought is backed up. Coming in at just under 6% of the meta, this composition doesn't even break 45% win rate. It is literal trash. And this isn't some, oh, it was only played by bad teams situation. We're about to cover which teams were playing each of these comps, and there were some juggernauts behind this comp. It just doesn't work. But I digress. Rant over. For now, at least. Jumping right into what I said, looking at who was playing each composition, we had that Common Core plus Sova comp that was played by some pretty high-profile teams. You have MyTech, Paraplegic Buffaloes, Started from CS, Vision Strikers, Party Parrots. Pretty much every major region was playing this in some capacity, and if you expected otherwise, you haven't been paying attention to any of my meta-analysis, because this comp has been around since the 2nd week of beta, and has been a staple ever since. Looking at the Common Core plus Raze, you have a super similar scenario, except you start seeing a very clear skew for European teams. We've got MyTech, Royals, Too Good for Lose, Vision Strikers, and Party Parrots again. You'll notice that 4 of these 5 teams are from Europe. That isn't a coincidence. Vision Strikers as well, for those of you that don't know, is actually the first major professional team in Korea. As a quick aside, the teams that I'm listing here aren't the only ones who played these comps. I'm just listing the top 5 who played them the most inside of the subsection of my data that's discussed in this video. Next up, we have Shock and Awe plus Cypher, and you see real fast why this comp had such an insane win rate. The teams that were playing it were pretty stacked. You have Valorando before their roster imploded, you have Genji, you have Fabrican, you have Fish123, and China Wen. This is like a who's who of some of the most insane teams in competitive right now. The fact that all of these teams hold this composition in such high esteem is very much so indicative of something, and if you're playing on a team, you should be taking note of this. There's no 2 ways about it. Next up, we have that Shock and Awe comp where you bring in Reyna instead of Raze. This comp I just want to take a quick moment to speak about, because it shows up with a lot more than just Reyna swap-ins. It shows up so much, in fact, that I've been very close to naming it as sort of another major archetype next to things like the Common Core and Shock and Awe. You have Brimstone, Cypher, Sova, Sage. In personal conversations on the side, I've started calling it the Big Brother comp, A lot of you probably know the saying, Big Brother's always watching, where it has Sova and Cypher. It's sort of a highly intel skewed core, and it shows up a ton. The teams that were playing it through the data in this set were Together We Are Terrific, an NA staple, Immortals, an NA staple, China Wen, an NA staple, and both Obsidian Esports and Godsent, who are very frequent participants in the EU side of things. Last up, we have the Walk of Shame, the folks who were playing that Reyna Raze comp. And we've got some crazy teams in here. Fabrican, Ninjas in Pajamas, Fish123. You've got like some of the best teams in Europe who are just running this comp down to abysmal win rates. Can you stop, guys? I'm putting you on notice. Like, just don't. Now that we've got most of the normal stuff out of the way, and some new stuff too, I wanted to touch on one more thing, and that's that there were a few major teams that I know we're gonna see in the Ignition series who were nowhere to be found during that. To kick us off here, we have EU's Prodigy. Prodigy is kind of in limbo right now. We obviously just had Mixwell signed to G2 in what was frankly the biggest signing in EU thus far, and so we have no idea how many of the Prodigy players are going to follow or what in the world's going to happen with this situation. But with how prolific Prodigy has been thus far, I'd be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't include some information on them. Since release, Prodigy has had 3 primary go-to compositions, and they were Reyna, Brimstone, Cypher, Sage, Jet, basically common core plus Jet, but they're bringing in Reyna over Breach as an entry fragger. Just straight up normal common core plus Jet. And then you have a last comp that is totally wonky. Reyna, Sova, Cypher, Sage, Viper. The closest thing that this actually compares to is what I was just talking about, that Big Brother composition. It's basically Big Brother, but you're bringing in Viper over Brimstone as a controller, and then you're using Reyna to fill your 5th slot. Mixwell has shown that he's one of the few pros who has the cojones to play Viper right now, and I love him for it, so hopefully we see more of this in the future. Maybe just switch out Reyna for an entry that I can approve of a bit more. Next up, we've got the NA Juggernauts in T1. T1's a bit of an odd beast because they fly super far under the radar. They play way less competitions than almost any other major entity in the scene right now, so getting a read on them is super difficult. That said, the 2 compositions we've seen from them recently are actually kind of the same comp in premise. You've got Common Core plus Raze, and then you've got Breach, Omen, Cypher, Sage, Reyna, which, bear with me here, is almost identical. The key swaps here are that you're obviously switching Brimstone for Omen, which, as many of you know, I'm a huge advocate of, and then in the 5th slot, switching Raze for Reyna. What you end up with here is 2 sides of the same coin. You have a very well-proven defensive core in the Common Core plus Raze, and then you have a variant of it that lends itself much better to offense. It'll be really interesting to see how T1's compositional dynamics change as time goes on if this kind of dichotomy shows up in other compositions that they pick up in the future. The last major org I wanted to take a look at are the Baylife boys themselves, TSM. I have no idea if they still use Baylife for branding, but I'm a boomer, so we're going with it. They have been throwing a wrench in everything lately because they're running Molten Core all the time. They are inflating Phoenix's win rate like it's their job. You've got Molten Core plus Sova and Molten Core plus Jet as their 2 go-tos. Anyone who's watched them recently knows that Wardell is borderline god tier on Jet and is absolutely terrifying. When they run this Molten Core plus Jet composition, I mean, it is masterclass tier stuff. Without going too far down the rabbit hole, I'm just gonna stick this in here. If I was ranking the teams that I thought were playing Valorant the best right now, it would be very, very hard to not put TSM at the top of my list for North America. They're one of the few teams that I think is actually playing Valorant and not just playing CSGO inside of Valorant's client. A video on that concept coming soon because it's a huge one. All right, that's all I got. Hopefully that's basically everything you'll need to know about the metagame going into the Valorant Ignition series. I know I missed a couple of teams, like Sentinels wasn't in here and C9 wasn't in here, but Sentinels hasn't played any major events for quite a while, and C9 doesn't really have a full roster yet, so making any sort of analysis of them is kind of a shot in the dark. Tens likes Jet. Nailed it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments below if you're looking forward to the Ignition series and what you think's gonna happen. I know that the G2 event is kicking us off like tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. It's gonna be insane. EU's been kind of a mess lately. You had like Valorando disbanding, and so it'll be super interesting to see how that pans out, what the teams look like. I know that when G2 tweeted out the team captains, I was super excited because it wasn't what you expect from these sort of invitational events. When you get an invitational like this, you're gonna immediately snap your mindset to, oh, it's Twitch Rivals, it's gonna be a bunch of streamers, and then they're gonna have like 4 good players around them. The team captains for this G2 event are like actual captains who deserve to be captains of teams. They are skilled players who are staples of the European competitive ecosystem. This tournament is not going to be a slouch, it is going to deliver, and I am psyched. With all that said, thanks as always for watching. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to throw me a like and a subscription. You can catch me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. Also, all at AnderzzTV, and I will see you in the next one.